so glad we see a pretty full room, considering this is a day when GW is closed due to the largest snowfall of the year. But you're the hardy entrepreneurs, as Lex said, and delighted you're here. We're also very fortunate in another way, and that is that this year's suite of prizes exceeds anything we've had before when I was director. In fact, I was looking at the history. When we started this competition 7 years ago, we only had $30,000 worth of prizes. And this year we're up to nearly 7 times that amount. So it does have a bigger payoff than it's ever had in history, and I hope it works for you. Lex mentioned that I'm an entrepreneur. In fact, I started my first company 2 months after I got my MBA. And I was here in DC and looking for something to do with entrepreneurship, and I'm very fortunate to have been involved in 3 others since then, and it's a wonderful career. You know, it's just so fulfilling to be able to be your own boss and do what your passion is. As times change, your passion changes, and my businesses have changed somewhat over the years too to reflect that. Show of hands on this question. How many of you in the room are on a semi-finalist team in the business plan competition? Who is not on a semi-finalist team? One? Anybody else? 2? You guys get the blue ribbon because you're here not because you have to be here to learn how to meet a deadline of turning in your plan on March 3rd, but you're here to learn something, I assume. So it's great. Glad to have you with us. Let me get right into it here. Just a plug for entrepreneurship. As you can see from this slide, entrepreneurship is a very important part of our economy and society. The last 2 bullets, I think, are perhaps the most important ones on this slide. The Commerce Department divides all businesses in the United States into small, medium, and large. Small means, I think, fewer than 100 employees, that sort of thing. And it's amazing that the small turns out to produce 70% of all job growth, just those entrepreneur-led firms. In fact, the large ones have negative growth. They lay off more people than they hire. Once you get to be big enough to be large, you're actually costing the economy jobs. But I think the most impressive one is innovation, where the small businesses produce 13 times as many new jobs as the big businesses do. You would think the big businesses with all their money, you know, the IBMs and those guys would do well, but and that's per employee, so that's normalized based on a per employee basis. So it's impressive what you and your fellow teammates who may not be here are going to be doing in the future. Okay, let's talk about the business plan. You already know it's a written document that explains virtually every aspect of the new business you're going to start. But the textbook says there are really 2 reasons for writing a business plan. One is for yourself and your teammates who are inside the firm to serve as a plan and a benchmark that you can use as the business grows to see how you're doing against what your expectations were, against your pro forma financials, against your expectations for new customers, marketing, whatever. Of course, it's also used for raising capital, and that's where it's useful outside the firm. So you can get angel investors, banks to lend you money. Many of you may be interested in becoming part of one of the incubators here in town. We're blessed to have many new incubators moving to DC recently. But the first thing they want to see when you apply for their space is your business plan. So you'll have one. Of course, business plan is really 2 things nowadays. It's not just the 10-page written plan I'm talking about today, but it's also the pitch, the presentation, that if you go to the finals, you'll be making for us on April 14th. One advantage I think you guys have of any class in the 7 years is that you're really familiar with Steve Blank's lean startup approach and the whole business model canvas. And I think that gives you a real advantage in putting your business plan together, because you can call on material from that canvas to include in your business plan. And as I'll walk through all the sections of the business plan that we recommend, but you'll see as we walk through them that a lot of that material can be pulled out of your canvas. But I want to give you a big red flag caution up front. Don't cut and paste it or copy and paste it. The 10-page business plan has to be written with a certain flow and character. And you can look at your canvas to pick up ideas or points, but when you write about them, write it freshly thought out with the flow that the business plan document itself deserves. No copying from it. There's actually a third good reason for writing a business plan that's not on this slide. And some of you may know that one from your personal experience, or you may have friends that know what that one is. And it's really a very important one, and that is that writing a business plan becomes a reality check for the team. Do you really want to go forward after you've faced all the challenges that you're putting down in this document called a business plan? You're putting down financial projections, you're showing how much capital you've got to raise, all the work that has to be done. And people get nervous about these things when they're faced with the reality of what they're putting in the plan. And a certain percentage of the teams that start this competition or intend to start through this competition don't ever enter, because once they face the reality and they've gone out and they've interviewed customers and gotten some pushback on their idea, and they give up. Well, hopefully they'll try again, but I think one of the best reasons for writing a plan is actually for yourself, very selfishly, but to find out if this is really something you want to go through with. Okay, the structure of the plan, as you know, is 10 pages maximum, plus 5 pages of appendices, and the cover page and the table of contents don't count. So don't put page numbers on either one of those two. Start page 1 with the first section, which will be executive summary. We'll be talking about that in a minute. On the cover page, use color. Make it look nice. If you've got a logo or a tagline that goes below your company's name, and definitely put your team members' names on the cover too. So use the cover for that. Table of contents is pretty straightforward. It's just the names of the sections and the page numbers. But start with page 1 on the next page after the table of contents, which will be the executive summary. I had these red flags, and then I was looking at the presentation that was done a week ago right here, and I realized that these have all been covered by Steve Rogers when he did the workshop last week on marketing your business to investors. He really covered these essentially, so I'm not going to go into those. In fact, I really agree with virtually everything that Rogers had in his presentation, except for one detail on the amount of capital to raise that I'll get to later at the end of the presentation. But if you were not at that session, I recommend you check the video for Steve Rogers' presentation last week on marketing your business to investors. It's a good session. Oh, in my write-up for the presentation this evening, I promised to tell you about Porter's 5 forces. Porter is Michael Porter, the famous professor at Harvard Business School, who's written, I think, something like 18 different books he's published, and he's had more articles he's written than anybody I know in history. And he's really an expert on strategy and on the competition. So he really has written a lot for entrepreneurs. And he talks about for any new business that's being started, you should look at the industry attractiveness. and see how that company in that industry is affected by the 5 forces. And starting at the top is the threat of new entrants. So my favorite example of a business that's really threatened by new entrants would be a restaurant business. I mean, there's always a new one opening, and you never know what it's going to be. So it's just a constant threat hanging out there. So you want to minimize these 5 threats. So avoid being a restaurant. By the way, restaurants have the shortest lifespan of any form of entrepreneurial endeavor. So they're not really very good bets most of the time. Second, going clockwise, would be the bargaining power of suppliers. And by that we're talking about who you get things from or your workforce. So my example there would be to be an auto manufacturer in Detroit, Michigan, because Michigan is a union state, and you got to hire union auto workers to work for you, and they have a very high level of pay in the state of Michigan. Now there are other states where it's much lower that are right to work states, but Michigan's not a right to work state, so you got to pay a very high wage there. So avoid businesses where you're locked into paying very high expenses for whatever it is you're securing, including labor. Down in the bottom right corner here, bargaining power of the buyers. My favorite example of that is a very successful company called SpaceX. It's one of Elon Musk's recent startups, and he's selling rockets to NASA. How many customers does he have? Well, the federal government's holding all the cards on that one, so he doesn't have much power. So that would score low on Porter. In the bottom left corner, rivalry among existing firms. So if you want to open a Toyota dealership in the Washington metro area, you're going to have a lot of competition and a lot of cutthroat competition among other Toyota dealers. So you can come up with your own examples, but that's one. And then the threat of substitute products or services. And my wife was shopping for a new Dell laptop computer, and quickly became aware that Dell may have been a hot brand a few years ago, but they've got a lot of competition from Lenovo and HP and Toshiba and a dozen others. There's a lot of competition there. So that's an example of that one. But you can measure any new business or industry by these 5 forces and pretty much tell. And this is what investors do that are investing in these. They want to get into a space that doesn't have all these threats. So you got to think about these things. So beyond Porter's 5 forces, you need to have done a feasibility analysis, and I think you probably have done at least some of this, because the primary research, as distinct from secondary, we'll talk about it later, is your customer interviews. And hopefully you've done a lot of those, and you've learned a lot from that primary research. And you may have also done some surveys, maybe even done a focus group. It's basically hands-on, like the picture in the bottom left corner, meeting face-to-face with people about your new products and services to learn what benefits you need to include in what you're offering, or features, but you really want to stress benefits, not features. And then secondary research is really internet research for the most part. You could go to the library, but what you can learn in your secondary research is material that others have gathered before and put in written form, often in the form of research reports. In fact, Fortune 500 companies spend tens of thousands of dollars on individual studies that are done on their industries just to learn what's going on in their backyard. And these research reports are available, many of them now are online, from a company called marketresearch.com. And as you know from the email that Lex sent out not too long ago, we've arranged for a special access to this entire database at this link, academic.marketresearch.com, using the username and password that were in the email were sent out. And GW students, and your teammates too, for that matter, can get access to this data and learn about what's going on in your marketplace. How big is it? Where is it? How many potential customers you might have out there. It's secondary research, because it's research that's already been done by other people. So you're not going to get the customer feedback you get from your primary research, but you can learn a lot about the what's already been done by others. And a lot of work has gone into these research reports. By the way, I'd like you to interrupt me at any time with questions. I want to not have to come back to these topics if you have a question on them. What's yours?
I just have a general question.
Yeah.
Will the slides be available after?
Yeah, at the end I'll give you my email address, and I can send you the slides if you're interested.
Yes.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Okay, let's talk about the 8 sections of the business plan. You hopefully know these pretty well by now. These do not include your business model canvas. That's a separate submission that you'll be required to turn in. And by the way, on the topic of the business model canvas, and I'm not going to spend much time on it. That's not my purpose here. We're really talking about the 10-page business plan. But on that topic, I did hear from some of the first-round judges that people didn't always submit it on a sheet of paper with the 9 sections. I guess it's usually available that way if you put it in a PDF or something on a single page. There were some teams that sent in just sort of a laundry list of stuff, and sometimes it would go on for 3, 4, or 5, or 6 pages, single-spaced, of stuff. And that's not the purpose of a business model canvas. The purpose is to get it very succinct, and so I'd recommend, if you can, put it actually on a 9-segment canvas form when you turn it in. Obviously, you can turn in a new one with your semifinal submission here. These 8 sections, as you've probably read on the website, each are weighted by our judges to carry a certain percentage of the total score that goes to the bottom line of determine your rank in the semifinals and whether or not you advance to the finals. Some are 5%, some are 10%, and there's one that's 15%. I think it's number 2 that's 15%. Who can tell me what the weights on all 8 of these combined add up to? Has anybody studied that enough to figure out that it's not 100%? Yeah, you'll find if you go to the rules, it shows you the percent weight on each one of these 8, and they add up to 75%. Did you know that? You're shaking your head, okay. The other 25% is divided among two other items. 15%, which is really ties with number 2 for the most of any single thing. The 15% that's not on this list is the long-term viability of your proposed new business. In other words, is it going to make it? That's sort of the viability question that the judges have to answer. And it's a combination of, is your marketing good, is your pricing good, are your finances strong so you're not going to run out of money, all those things. It's sort of a overall encompassing question. The viability, 15%. And then the last 10% that's not on here is your business model canvas combined with the quality of writing in the business plan itself, this 10-page plan. As you may have guessed, we want to encourage good, clear writing in these papers, and so that's why that gets to 10% in combination with the business model canvas. Which of these 8 sections do you think the judges are going to read first? Customer development.
That's like really important. But probably not.
It is important, customer development.
I would think it's 30%. Because it's going to provide a general explanation of your business. If you can't explain your business in 50 words, then you don't know what you're trying to do. You don't know what your business is.
Tell me your name.
My name is Cynthia Beasley.
Cynthia, you're right. They do want to get an overview, and I think they will read the executive summary first. Also, it's the first one they get to, but it does have an overview, and we'll talk about it in more detail in a minute. Other question is, question here?
When you say also 50 words, is there another document that's just 50 words?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in just a minute. You're a good shill for my next discussion here. Thank you. Which section do you think an investor, as opposed to a judge, might read first? Back here.
Financial projections?
You're right, the last one, the financials. I see so many angel investors. Lex mentioned I'm in a couple of angel clubs. They just flip to the back and start looking at the columns and rows of numbers. How's this thing going to work out? Oh, I guess it's good enough. I think I'll read the executive summary and see if it's a business I'm interested in. So I read the executive summary second instead of first. But I think the judges are probably going to start at the top because they have to read the whole thing anyway. An investor could throw it away after looking at the financials. Let's talk about them one at a time, starting with the executive summary. And it does include, as part of it, your 50-word description of the venture. Lex, is there a place in the executive summary where you'd like that? At the beginning, at the end? Does it matter where they put it?
It doesn't, and in fact, PitchBurner requires it to be submitted separately.
Okay.
So you might not even want to use up the 50 words in your
Okay, so it's not really embedded in the
It
executive
doesn't have to be.
I'm sorry?
It certainly doesn't have to be.
Okay.
A good 50-word summary, though, really does set the tone, and so you might want to think about putting it at the very
Yeah,
beginning.
I was going to suggest you put it right at the beginning. So you have a very succinct paragraph at the beginning, 50 words or less, to sort of kick it off. Sort of like a tweet or a whatever, just a way to communicate in as small a space as possible what your business is all about and put it at the very beginning. But it sounds like you may have to enter it a second time if it's using the software that we're using for the submissions this year. I also recommend that it be no more than one page. I don't think you want to belabor this. You've got 10 pages and you've got 8 sections, and so obviously you can go more than one page on average. And my advice is to go maybe a full 2 pages on a section that you think is really your strength, your strongest point. Could be management, it could be customer development, it could be marketing, it could be, we'll talk about all of them. But I'd say spend more column inches on the stuff that you're strong in, and fewer inches on the stuff where you're weak. Yeah?
It's limited to 50 words.
Oh no, I'm talking about the whole business plan. The 8 sections of the business plan, you have 10 pages to write.
No, I understand that, but the executive summary is just 50 words, right?
No. There are 2 things going on with the executive summary. You've got a 50-word description of the venture that you're required to submit, and then an executive summary that is an overview of the entire business plan, which I think will fill up that first page probably, but I wouldn't go more than just that 1 page out of the 10
So
on the
50 words, it's one.
Well, there's another requirement for a 50-word submission, and that you're going to submit separately, or you could embed it at the very beginning of your 1 page. You could do either one. You got some flexibility here to room to be creative. I hope that's clear to everybody. Good. Any questions on the executive summary? I just have 1 slide. That's it. Pretty straightforward. Great. Let's get into the meat here. Number 2, product market description and fit. This is really jumps right into the heart of what you've been learning through your business model canvas and the lean startup process. It's got the value proposition in it. It's got your customer segments in it. Stuff that you've been working on with your business model canvas. And so you're going to cover some stuff that's in your canvas. Again, don't copy and paste it, but you'll cover it in this section. But I'd start with the description of a product or service. Obviously, the executive summary had some reference to it, but this should flesh it out a little bit more thoroughly right here at the beginning so that the reader really understands your product or service in pretty good form and how the customer segment has its need fulfilled by your product or service. So you're trying to weave these together. And not only fulfilled, but how well is it fulfilled and why? Why does it really do a great job of fulfilling the customer's need? And then you get into the value proposition. I'll go into a little more detail about this section. One of the first things I think the judges like to know is how far along is your product or your service in actually becoming reality. Some people may have a sketch of something on a piece of paper, and that's as far as they've gotten. Or they may be beyond that. They may have working drawings that they've submitted to a manufacturer in China. Or they may have gone beyond that and actually built a prototype, and something they can tinker with a little bit. Or the next step past that would be actually to have some prototypes being tested by customers in a sort of alpha testing mode, which is your first form of getting it out for testing with customers. Or maybe you've gone all the way to beta testing, so you've actually made enough of them, and it could be a service, doesn't have to be a product. You've actually beta tested it, which means you're really refining it in the last stage before you go live for the world. And we've had companies, certainly some that have made the finals I can think of recently, who have gotten as far as going live for the world by the time the April finals come along. So, but address that in this 10-page plan. How far along are you? Where are you on that path? Talk about the industry. It's not just the product, but the industry it's a part of, which gets to some of Porter's stuff about you want to make sure it's a viable industry. If you're in social media, that's an industry that's growing. Clearly, it's on an upward path. If you're in print media, it's going the other way. Print media is, the Washington Post was sold, which was one of the best newspapers in our country, was sold recently for a song. Unfortunately, print media is just on the decline. But anyway, you got to talk about the industry you're part of, and you can show that graphically. And you want to honestly talk about not just the positive things going on in the industry, but there could be an elephant in the room that's a negative item, and if you don't address that elephant and talk about it, you're not going to have much credibility with your audience. If you're proposing a new kind of airbag for automobiles, and you don't talk about the 8 million autos that were just recalled in the last 6 months because of airbag problems, that's a problem of one company actually. That's the supplier to Audi and Honda and a lot of other companies. But you got to talk about the negatives going on as well as the positives in your industry. And just a simple chart of growth in the industry. This is the semiconductor industry. Just, and have it in dollars, how's the industry doing? So people can see at a glance. A picture obviously can take up less space in this 10-page plan because space is at a premium here than writing a lot of stuff. Question?
Obviously, it's easier to come up with historical data than it is to come up with projections.
Mm-hmm.
Given that we are less certain about projections, should we give less weight or less space and time to describing the expected next couple of years that we have been describing so far?
You might be able to find projections in this secondary market research data that you could, say that in a footnote down here it's projected by so-and-so. And that way get yourself out of the middle and make it seem more, it would be more objective. if you want to project into the future. If it's important that you show not only where it's been in the past, which is what this one is, but if you want to show the future as well, that'd be great if you can find that kind of information. Another question?
Is it better to show that you are tackling a smaller market and owning a lot of it versus a larger market and owning part of it? You know, Google dominating the search engine industry versus dominating technology. Is there like a preference or advantage?
What's the question?
Basically, like, should you talk about a larger market, or should you really narrow it down? Like, we are a
Yeah.
like X, Y, Z.
As narrow as you can find data to support it. You'll have trouble in some cases getting it narrow enough, and we'll talk about some narrow markets in a few minutes here. But you got to make a call on that one, and you also want to make a self-serving call. If it looks better by having a bigger market and a smaller one, then go with whichever one looks better. Yeah.
There's something like a chart like this. Would this be something we include in the 10-page plan or in the appendices?
Yeah, I'd do a little tiny 1-inch by 3-inch box right embedded in the 10-page plan, unless it's a big spreadsheet with a lot of numbers on it, like and then you can put it in the appendix.
Okay.
Or if it's use the appendix for stuff that's voluminous, but or like if you have results of customer interviews that you've done and you have it in a big tabular form, you know, you can reference it in the section we'll get to later on customer interviews, but include the raw data in an appendix, because that's a great place just to get that stuff out of the 10 pages. And you might talk about whether the industry you're becoming a part of is a concentrated industry or fragmented. Concentrated would be an industry dominated by a few large firms. Fragmented is an industry that's lots of small firms, which I think is generally a more attractive situation to be walking into with your new business than one where, unless part of your business plan is to get acquired really quickly because you've got some proprietary technology that one of the big guys would like to buy or something like that. So I don't know what the right answer is for your company, but generally if you're going to get into a business and have a sustained multi-year run, you're better getting into one that's got some fragmentation so you can establish yourself. And in fact, the general attractiveness of the industry, and this gets back to our friend Michael Porter, are all these points on his forces. You don't want to have, you know, a lot of substitute products that you're going to compete with. You don't want to have suppliers that are going to hold the gun to your head on their wages. You don't want to be selling to one buyer like the federal government. All those forces come in when you're looking at your industry structure. Before I go to section 3 of the business plan, any other questions on product market description and fit? Okay. Competitor analysis, barriers to entry, and strategy. This is another one of the real meaty ones. I'm really spending most of my time, as you'll soon find out, on sections 2, 3, 4, and 8, which is the financials, because I think those are the ones that deserve the most discussion right here today. Strategy is so important in anything you do with respect to starting a new business, because you got to know what your competitors are doing and how you can either leverage that, take advantage of it, and turn it to your advantage, or come up with a different product that doesn't compete directly with them if they're really strong competitors. And you got to know what the barriers to entry are, and then hopefully you're getting into a situation where you can help create barriers to entry, and we'll talk about how you can do that in a minute, once you're a player in the industry, to keep other people out. And that's something, if you're successful in doing that, we'll show you how to do that in one of the slides here. Well, let's jump right into it. The 3 most successful strategies, and guess who came up with these 3? Michael Porter at Harvard. He wrote a book about it. Now everybody agrees these are the 3 most successful strategies for starting a new business. The low-cost strategy. If you can really have a product that's lower cost, higher value, more value for the money, that's just a great business to get into. Problem with that is usually to do that you've got to be big and have an economy of scale. I mentioned Walmart and McDonald's, huge companies, but both of those started with single locations. So I mean, you can get there eventually, but it's really tough. I'm reminded of what Apple is doing right now with starting to design a new automobile, the new Apple car, and it's all under wraps. Nobody knows for sure what it's going to be, but they've got an extra $80 billion in cash, I think, right now, something like that. So they don't have to worry about the problem that you'd be worrying about not having enough money to get into low-cost strategy. But they could actually do that, and I can't wait to see what they come up with, or if they, like a lot of other things they've investigated, they've decided not to do it. Sometimes they'll spend millions, or in fact, in this case, I think they've already spent close to $1 billion or $1.5 billion just on this auto thing they're working on. But they could decide just to write it off, that it's not going to work, but we'll see. Product differentiation strategy. Apple is the king of that, where you have a really unique product, something that really other people don't have. I mean, if you're a Windows laptop, you're competing with all those other companies, the ones I was mentioning before. But if you're an Apple laptop, you're it. You own that because of your unique product. But actually, the most popular for new businesses is this third one, a market-focused strategy, where you really carve out what some people call a niche market, and you become really an ace at understanding this market and how they think and what they do. Like if you're selling to golfers, Ping said, okay, that's all we're going to do is sell to golfers. We're going to understand everything. In fact, I think they started with just the putter, and then new putters better than anybody, and then expanded into the irons and the woods and the rest of the clubs. But if you're a movie buff, that's all Netflix cares about, are people that want to watch videos, movies. Really focused in one area. Although I was giving this talk once, and somebody said Netflix is not just a market-focused strategy. They also are product differentiation, sort of a unique product, and they're also the lowest cost. To get, whether it's the DVD or the online viewing, either one, it's the lowest cost available, I think. So they're sort of my company of the year, because they fit into all the categories. If you've got one of those, let's talk afterwards. Was there a question?
Yeah, a quick one. Do you think it's a good idea to mention one of these strategies in your plan? Do you think that'll impress the people reading it?
Sure.
Cool.
If you have enough room to get into that, yeah. That you're trying to leverage this this strategy that has been one of the most successful strategies out there. Remember, the title on this section of your business plan has the word strategy in it. In fact, on the topic of strategy, the third one, where you're really going for a niche market strategy, an example I can give you is my first company, the one I started right after I got my MBA. I was here in D.C. and we started looking around at all the businesses in D.C. and decided there's so many nonprofits, nonprofits everywhere, all kinds of groups. And so if you imagine this rectangle is all the different kinds of nonprofits, and each one of these is a different kind, churches, schools, hospitals, and the one we picked were associations. And people's faces go blank. What's an association? Well, it turns out it's the second largest industry in Washington, D.C. metro area. Government's the biggest. Associations are number 2. So that was my first startup, was doing software enterprise software that associations could use to run their businesses, keep track of their membership databases, their fundraising, their subscriptions, their conferences, meetings, all the things that they do that no other kind of business does. And I had that company for 32 years. It's great. It was just this one little corner down here, associations in the nonprofit world. So you sort of take a big sheet of paper for nonprofits, then tear out the little corner, and that's where you focus. That's the niche market or target market approach. And you just become really good at that and develop your reputation based on that. But to get there, to discover it, how do you find it? You really have to go down and look at the size of the market. You couldn't become an association software company as easily in other cities. It's pretty simple here. Plus, we had a trend that we discovered as we were writing our business plan, that associations were actually moving their national headquarters from Chicago and other cities around the United States to Washington because of the increasing need to lobby at a rate of 1 a week. So we had that company for over 30 years. You imagine how many associations moved their national headquarters to Washington area in that 30 years. And that helped to grow the business. But you have to go through the size and then look at the niche market, find out their unique needs. This becomes an iterative process. You may have defined your market too small and you want to expand it. Like within associations, there are really two halves to it. There are the professional societies and there are trade associations. Professional societies have doctors and lawyers and professionals that are members of them, and trade associations have companies that are members. My first customer was the National Tire Dealers Association. Who would have guessed? Tire dealers, they're a big deal in this country. So they have a big association here in DC that represents them. So you do a lot of research. And this online marketresearch.com stuff will help you. Question?
What advice would you give to a company that's trying to sell a product that can be used by multiple different segments in terms of how do you segment those? Say you have an app that can be used by somebody who likes to listen to music on their own and also likes to listen to music in social settings.
Mm-hmm.
Two behaviors by one individual. You segment that by specific different, for example, companies or people, or is behavior-based segmentation a useful way to get at that? Basically, if that segment's running into each other, like
Yeah.
I think I'm trying to.
I just segment it by your customers' age group, millennials, or whatever category you're going to target the music to, and whatever setting they listen to it in would not be that relevant because it's who you're selling to. That's what's called a B2C company, from a business to a consumer. Mine was a B2B company, from a business to a business, nonprofit business. But, so there actually is a third one, B2G, business to government. So almost every startup is one of those three: B2C for consumer, B2B for business, and B2G for government. But you're clearly in a B2C category. You're selling to consumers who want the music for whatever purpose. It doesn't matter to you as long as they buy it. Other questions before we go on? Yeah.
Going off the B2C to B2B distinction you made, what if your product, I guess, falls into both? You can target or market it to a consumer and then also to a business?
That's good. You have a bigger market, I guess, if you can handle it. I mean, it requires more marketing resources, obviously, to cover both, but you also have more revenue potentially too if you're successful. And we'll talk a little bit later on how you can cut down on the cost of marketing too, to market smarter. We'll get into that. But in the same section, you got to look at actual competitors that you're going to face once you launch your product. Really have a list. You can maybe use some of this online market research material to do some, if you haven't already identified the list of competitors. But actually, the very best way to find out who the real competitors are today are customer interviews. Talk, what you're already doing for your business model canvas, because they're the ones that can tell you who the competitors are, and there may be competitors that are new. In fact, when you're talking about competitors, you got to really not look at just today's direct competitors, but the indirect ones, the ones that are, in a slightly different business. Like if you're opening a sushi restaurant and you consider your competitors all those other sushi restaurants, well, that's not quite right, because you also have a choice of other kinds of food besides sushi, and those are indirect competitors. And of course, the restaurant business is classic, as I mentioned earlier, because of the future. They're always popping up new competitors all the time. So you got to look to the future to see who's likely to come in and compete with you down the road. So this segment on competitor analysis needs to go beyond just your current competitors, but look at the indirect ones. People substitute one good for another sometimes, and so that's an indirect competitor. I'm sure you can think of examples of that in your fields, but that's human nature. And then we talked about barriers to entry, which goes in the same section of your business plan. The best way to build a barrier to entry, keep out competitors, is to develop some intellectual property that is your unique ownership. Patents are probably the single best. You start by usually getting a provisional patent, which is very inexpensive compared to the full patent. Usually for a couple $1,000s or maybe less, you can get a provisional, which is good for 1 year. But then before that year is up, you've got to file for the full utility patent, which will cost you probably 10 times as much or more than that provisional patent cost. But then you've got a lock on it, assuming it's accepted by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. You've got a lock on it then for 20 years, 20 years from the date of submission. And that would be the date of submission of your provisional, actually. So, but that's a nice 20-year sort of protection from competition if you've got something that's patentable. You can also protect your mark, your trademark or your service mark, so nobody else can have it. But I encourage you first to do a search and make sure your mark hasn't already been trademarked by somebody else. And you can do searches right at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, uspto.gov. uspto.gov. But then you also have to look at whether the name has been registered in the state that you're incorporated in, or where you have your LLC. So you can make sure it's available in your state. Question?
I did that. The trademark office, you have to have the mark, or so you can't. Apparently, they gave me a provisional, but because we didn't really have a logo that was unique, it's provisional for 5 or so years before they would recognize the name.
So, okay, this is on your trademark, not on a patent.
I'm sorry, trademark.
Trademark, yeah.
The words themselves won't qualify.
Okay, so they actually gave you a provisional on your trademark for 5 years?
Yes, because they claimed it wasn't a trademark, because at the time I didn't have our logo.
Okay.
It was for a different thing, not what I'm competing for, but
Okay.
it was for something else that I needed a trademark for.
I didn't know they were ever that generous.
I thought it was.
That's good. That's good. Copyrights, of course, are for works of authorship, something you've written down, a song or a book or a movie or something like that, and that can similarly be protected. That's Library of Congress, where you get your copyrights. uspto.gov is for the first two, Library of Congress for the third. And for the fourth one, you don't have to submit it to anybody. Who can tell what is a trade secret?
Don't tell anybody.
Formula for Coke is the classic example. Supposedly it's locked up in a vault at headquarters. Huh?
Coca-Cola Enterprise.
Yeah, in Atlanta, Georgia, and corporate headquarters, they've got locked up and involved. But there are obviously people that know
Some people
what the
know
formula
something.
is, but they try to separate the production process so no one person gets all the information about all the ingredients, whatever. But trade secret really is a good way to start a business if it's not the kind of thing that can ever be reverse engineered. We had a winner a couple of years ago that came up with a formula for kombucha, and they're using the trade secret approach because it's really hard to reverse engineer what the ingredients are in a kombucha drink. So many ingredients, but it's a great way to protect yourself from competition. Any questions on the third section before we go on to number 4?
I have one
Yeah.
question. You indicated that you had to check within your state if someone was utilizing it. But see,
Your name,
the right
corporate name.
Well,
Mhm.
the interesting thing is, and I'm originally from Kentucky, and I use the name Change Masters. And someone, my accountant had done a search, and there was nobody utilizing that name in the state of Kentucky. But then someone calls me and says, "Oh, you can't use that name because I'm using it in Minnesota." And so, weren't they incorrect in asking me not to use my name when I was using it in Kentucky? Now, I did change it to Change Masters of Kentucky.
Okay, so you're legal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and
So,
of Kentucky, you'd leave off a few things too, probably. Yeah,
but that's what they did. Though.
they may have just been bluffing.
Probably.
I mean, you could pay your lawyer a lot of money to answer that question if you wanted,
My
but
daughter or my
whatever.
I can ask her.
But the other place you got to check, besides what we've already talked about, is the domain names. You got to come up with a good domain name, and that's easy to search. We didn't used to have to worry about that before about 1990, but now we got to check that one too. Check off that box. Okay, let's move on to marketing, customer relationships, and channels. It's a great section where you can really show off your stuff, and I'll tell you how. You have to have positioning. We talked about value proposition before. This is a selling proposition. Pricing. We'll talk about advertising versus public relations and the trade-off there, and then channels. Channels are important. Your sales channel, your distribution channel, and that sort of thing. So you got several things you want to cover here, and let me suggest you go at it this way, starting with positioning. It's interesting in the electric car space. We right now have, this is pre-Apple. I don't know if Apple's going to do an electric car or not, but you got Tesla at the high end, and on a single charge you can drive that 300 or 400 miles. You got the Nissan Leaf. Thank you. You can get over 100 miles on a charge. It's sort of middle, and then the Chevy Volt at the bottom end. It's like 40 miles. But then they put a gas tank in there because you can't get very far on that charge with the Chevy Volt. So you can see each one has positioned themselves differently, and it's not an accident. They want to avoid competition. They're just carving out different parts of the market for themselves. So you need to do the same with your business. If you've got competitors, see if you can carve it out and position yourself as a higher quality or more value-based or more whatever. Something that the other guys don't do. I mean, Starbucks came into the market not that many decades ago, and they came in at the high end. They're the most expensive coffee in town, and now they're the biggest. So there's a lesson in that too. I really think you need to come in with a high quality, high priced product at the beginning, because if you ever change the price, customers expect it to be down, not up, except for maybe inflation adjustments or something like that. You can have a little 2 or 3% adjustment annually, but it's tough to raise the price of a product once you're out there with a less expensive one. And it's price. Positioning is not just on price. Positioning is also on market. You know, who the buyers are, who this will appeal to. Which brings us to the USP, unique selling proposition. You've got to come up with a clear statement from your customer's point of view of why somebody should buy your product. From the customer's point of view. Let me give you an example. When it absolutely, positively has to be there overnight. Who is that? FedEx, yeah. It doesn't have to be a selling proposition that's that brief. It could be a whole sentence or whatever. But that one's almost a tagline for FedEx now, when it absolutely positively has to be there overnight. And then once you've come up with that, and it takes a while to wordsmith it and get it exactly right, then you want to be able to repeat that in advertising, in PR, in whatever public arena you find yourself when you're publicly speaking, talking about your company, anything. You've got to keep coming back with the same words. And you're going to think, gee, they're going to get tired of hearing this, but you've got to keep repeating it, and then they'll finally catch on and remember it. Pricing. Really two approaches, cost-based or value-based. To me, value-based is the preferred method. Cost-based you could use if you're selling professional services, consulting firm or doctors, lawyers, that sort of thing. But it's tough to do the cost-based because you have to be sure you're including all the costs. And there's sometimes costs that are hard to find, that are hidden in the income statement as rent or depreciation. It's hard to find that one, but you got to include all your costs when if you're going to use a cost-based approach. Question in the back.
Yeah, which approach would be best for a nonprofit, like a humanitarian-based social venture?
I couldn't quite hear it. For a nonprofit. Yeah, for a
nonprofit.
You're not. Well, it depends on the type of nonprofit. Are you selling something, or are you giving something away, or what? It depends on the type.
It would be like
business.
A health service.
Health service?
Yeah, it'd be business to business, I guess, to like bridge the gap in demand, supply and demand for certain customers or particular health service.
You know, that might be enough of a professional service. It's health services, right? Mm-hmm. That you could make it cost-based, because your main objective, since you're a nonprofit, is covering all your costs and having a little margin so you can reinvest in your growth in the future, and you don't have to worry about paying your shareholders a dividend or whether or not their stock is going to go up in price, because there aren't any. You're a nonprofit. You've really got a nice world you're living in where you could base it on cost, but my caution is to be sure to include all your costs. And we'll get to the financials later, and you can see that there's some things that are kind of sneaky that are costing you money that you want to be sure to include there. Value-based is, what does the customer value it at? And so my advice is to start out as a high-end product with a high price tag in terms of your market positioning. Position it up as a luxury product if you can, unless it just can't be done because of what your strategy is. But if you can do that, I'd price it high, and then if you need to lower the price later, you have room to do so. You should have enough feedback from your customer interviews already to be able to decide how high that price could go and still fly with the potential customers you've been talking about. And by using this value base, you're really reflecting the real world of what it's worth to the consumers or businesses that are buying it. You're not trying to base it on anything artificial. Let's talk about how you promote your product or your service? Do you use advertising or do you use PR? And it's sort of a constant battle that you hear between those two sides, which is preferable. Does anybody in the audience have a strong opinion on this, one way or the other, whether if you're trying to sell something, it's better to use advertising or better to use PR? In the back?
Use both of them.
Use both? Yeah. So let me give you a couple of examples. When we're trying to promote people to come to the finals of the business plan competition, do you think I'm talking about Lex right now, since he's running this thing, should purchase an ad in the Hatchet and advertise that we're going to have all these great business plans presented? Or, alternatively, do you think he should try for PR? Try to get the Hatchet to publish an article about the business plan competition, which probably takes a lot more time trying to get that to happen than it would be to buy an ad. But which one is better for the purpose of getting people to come and attend the finals on April 14th?
Getting the Hatchet to cover the event and write an article themselves.
Absolutely. That's the right answer. PR. It has the advantage of having really no charge. It's great for entrepreneurs on low advertising or low PR budgets. And you could use all these mechanisms. You can publish newsletters, do articles like in the Hatchet. The one I saw recently that I thought was terrific, watching the Super Bowl, Under Armour, you know the company, 30-second ad, $4.5 million. That's what it costs this year for the Super Bowl. Or if you're interviewing a player after the game, and he's got that Under Armour logo on, which one is better? Yeah, obviously the second one is, because they interview the guys that are the heroes of the game. Doesn't cost you anything. So you just make sure everybody that's going to be interviewed has their Under Armour logo on their shirt, and you're $4.5 million better off. In fact, probably even better than that. More people see it and remember it and believe it when the player's wearing it than they do watching the $4.5 million ad. And PR is really great for entrepreneurs because all of you probably love to go out and talk about your businesses and how great the products and services are, and that's how you do it, using PR. And then the last thing I want to cover in this section has to do with the channels. You've got a sales channel, which is what this slide is about, and every product or service in the world that's sold has a funnel. You start at the top of the funnel with a lot of prospects, and you end up down here at number 6 with a sale. And you need to know for your business what the number of prospects you need, how many prospects you need to generate one sale. What's the ratio of prospects to customers? And the labels on these vary depending on the product or service you're selling. But basically you're going through with somebody responding to an AdWord on Google, or click-throughs on banner ads, that kind of thing. And that gets you an initial contact, and then you know who they are, and you can try to qualify them by pointing them to a website where they see more information, and you're working them through a funnel. It could be in person. You could have people out there selling, human beings too. It doesn't have to be online. Whatever your funnel is, you need to understand your funnel and understand how you're going to make a sale and how you're going to get enough prospects at the top of the funnel to meet your goal at the bottom for sales. And then moving from sales channel to distribution channel, the other kind of channel, you need to know how you're going to deliver the product. Netflix uses the U.S. Postal Service. Amazon uses a lot of UPS and the Postal Service. But if you're selling B2C, and C is a customer shopping at a mall or at retail level, you're going to have to figure out how to distribute your product to the retail stores where it's sold, assuming it's something you can buy at retail. Question?
Well, do you have a software product? Would you say like internet, app stores, stuff like that?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd do everything online for that. There may be some other places you can promote it besides on the internet to get there. I mean, because that's the big deal now in digital marketing, is they get one source to point to another and, you know, feed people through to get them into the right funnel at the right place and time. But yeah, when you're thinking of trucks and warehouses and distribution, you know, that becomes an important topic. Maybe your product doesn't require much on this point when you're writing your business plan, but on the other hand, maybe you do need to think about it. Question?
In the case of a nonprofit where you're looking for partners, possible donors, are you kind of saying that they're the customers, or are you focusing on the beneficiaries of the nonprofit?
The donors or the beneficiaries, they're both pretty important.
They would be customer segments.
Yeah.
You need to raise money from the
donors. The donors are your source of revenue, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say they're probably number one then in terms of your focus, because if you don't have the funds from the donors, you don't have a business yet. The easy part is dealing with the beneficiaries, but you got to do that with the right sensitivity and the right quality to be successful with the donors next time. So it's a cycle you're following where you've got to be sensitive to all concerned, but it really does start with the donors, doesn't it?
Okay. So with the channels, you're talking about your interaction with them and how you market your service or product to them, right?
Yeah. And with donors, it can be challenging. There's a lot of networking involved in finding donors for a particular cause, which your nonprofit represents. And how do you work through the networking to find the right people? Because if you can find one, then maybe through that one you can find two others or something, you know. Questions?
I teach nonprofit marketing proposals. So if you don't appeal to donors by telling how you're going to serve the beneficiary, you're not going to get donors. So you'd have to appeal to them by deciding the benefits to your clients, which would be.
We'll get you two guys together afterwards. That sounds like she's got some good advice.
If you want to
Okay, want to get you out of here by 7 o'clock, so we're going to go through the last few sections here. There are three keys in your business model canvas: the key activities, the key resources, and the key partners. And we want you, in this section, again, don't copy and paste from your canvas, but discuss these key parts of your business model and describe the importance each of them plays in the execution of your business plan. Because it could be that your business relies more on partners, like this gentleman's donors to his nonprofit, where you really, these are, you can call them partners, you can call them donors. You might want to call them partners because they're the rainmakers, so to speak, that make it happen. And really spend some time in this fifth section of your business plan talking about these three keys and how they work with each other. Again, the 8 sections have different percentage values. There was one that was 15%, number 2 we talked about earlier. This one happens to be one that's only 5% because it may not apply that importantly to some of your business plans. On the other hand, it should be in there for everyone. You're going to talk about these, but you should have all the raw material you need to write this page, or however much space it takes, gleaning material from your canvas. I'm going to jump over to number 6, customer development, which again is very important. In fact, as this lady pointed out earlier, it's really fundamental to your business model canvas. And so again, you're going to have a lot of material that you can present here. And really all those customer interviews you've been doing need to be described in this section so that you can convince the judge that's reading this that you've validated your model because you've done sufficient number of customer interviews that have been positive. You can, obviously expand on it more in a page in the appendix if you need to. And I think it's also important in the second bullet here to really talk about how you've used those customer interviews to pivot appropriately to a better product or service or delivery method or whatever you've pivoted to that you weren't originally planning to do. Back there?
Is there a preferred way you'd like to see the customer interviews described in the plan? Like quotes from customers, like in particular, or is there any particular format you'd like to see that in?
I think you want this to work for you. You want to show off whatever you think is really valuable that's come out of your customer interviews and your customer development that really will help convince the judge that your plan is one that ought to move on to the finals. And it could be something very different for each different company in this room that's competing, or each different team that's competing. That's a nice thing about this format that Lex has come up with. You can you could write, if you really are strong, you could write 2 pages on this. Or you could write a half a page, and hopefully it'll be more than a half a page. But this is a really important one.
John, if I could jump in here. I
Please.
think what's important here is to describe what you, first of all, quantify the interview. Don't use indefinite language.
Right.
If you did 50, say you did 50. Then gather the learnings. And sometimes a quote is a great way to say it. What we learned was people want XYZ, and here's what Mary Jones, the president of the XYZ company, said.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, again, trying to convince. And pivots are important. If you learn stuff that causes you to change direction and do something different, you start off in one direction and you pivot, that's very, really valuable. That again shows me that you've learned something by doing these interviews.
And hopefully at that point, once you talk about your interviews and your pivot, as you just said, you'll be positioned where you can talk about, now we believe we're really positioned for success. We've done all our homework, we've interviewed all these people, we've done these pivots, and present the argument about why you think this is really going to be a successful business based on everything you've learned. Sam?
Is there a difference with customer interviews if it's a quality over quantity type of interview? For example, if we need to talk to important people in the government that we've been successful at doing, but at the cost of doing 50 interviews or 100 interviews.
Sure. No, you want to make the argument that works for you. If they're just, a handful of interviews that have been so important in formulating your strategy, talk about them, quote from them, like said. Yeah, take direct quotes if you've got them available. So if you've got a product you're selling to consumers, just to take one example of where you might position yourself at the end of section 6, you could say that you've done so much research, you know that your location of your stores where you're going to be selling your product is in the right proximity to customers, right access to the labor force, close to suppliers, right access to everything. You've taken into account favorable state and local tax rates, economic incentive plans. DC has some great economic incentive plans for high-tech companies. If you locate in the corridor between Shaw and Mount Pleasant, you get a lower tax rate, believe it or not, on your DC taxes, because that's a tech corridor now. So, there are all kinds of things you can do, and the more you can touch on to convince the judges you've really thought about all these things that are going to work to your advantage, so much the better for you. Management team. I know a number of venture capital firms that consider this number one of all the sections here. I don't know if they literally turn to it first when they're reading the business plan, but they believe in the people being the most important thing, because they know that when you're starting a new business, things are going to change, and you're going to have to adapt to different environments going forward in a year, 2 years, 5 years down the road. And that if you've got the team that can do that, you're more likely to succeed than any other possible way. That you're really investing largely in people. So this is a very important section. And you want to talk about your team. That's why it's in red. These four, you talk about only if you've got some real stars on the board of directors, or professionals like lawyers or investment bankers, that and you really don't need an organization chart unless it helps you, again, convince the judge that you're structuring your business for success, that you've done everything right.
Do you have advice for a management team that is undergraduates and that don't necessarily have deep domain experience in the field that they're training to come in?
Sure, deep domain experience. That's the name of the game, right?
But if you don't necessarily...
Oh, don't have deep domain experience.
Yeah.
You saw your strengths. What are the strengths of your team?
Well, like, for example, would you say that if you don't have the deep entrepreneurship experience or the domain experience, would you say that it's better to highlight other particular things that the management team has done, or to just not try and go over or stress, accomplishments that aren't actually directly connected to the business manager?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you might want to be cautious and not try to exaggerate beyond your means or beyond the qualifications of the team members. I think in writing this whole business plan, one of the things that's going to come through very importantly is your enthusiasm and energy. And optimism. If you can write it in a style that somehow reflects your personal high energy level and enthusiasm for the topic and commitment. I mean, you're all in on this, or you better be. You better be all in on it and somehow convey that in the writing of the business plan. And I think that'll count as much with the judges as almost anything, if you can communicate that you're really believers that this is where you want to spend your life building this business, even though it may only be a year. It's your life for that year, whatever. When I started my first business, I thought, gee, it's going to be a great year for me, and then I'll probably not succeed or something will go wrong, and it ended up being 30 years. But so you don't know. You sort of take it one step at a time.
John, just one quick point on that as well. It's always wise, if you don't have the a resource on your team, to say so.
Mm-hmm.
So the last thing you want to do is not have a resource like domain expertise and leave the judge with the impression that not only do you not have the resource, but you don't know that you don't have the resource. So say, we have these talents, we need these talents, and we're going to acquire them in the next 6 months.
Honesty, absolutely. These are 4 bullet points you might want to cover on your management team. But again, you've got to decide what's important for each person, depending on their role in your new business, and how much space you've got to write about this, and how much you want to emphasize it. But people are important, no question about it. And you want to perhaps point out too, again, assuming it's true, I hope it is, that the people complement each other. Very important in a team that you not all be the same. You need to have different skill sets and different strengths. But I wouldn't spend much time unless you've got on, you have a friend named Steve Case that's agreed to be on your board of directors or something like that. You might not even want to mention anything about your board. Now, board of advisors is often made up of customers, because that's where you're getting customer feedback on an ongoing basis. My first company was a software company, and so we had what we called the users group, which are all the users, the customers, and they give us incredibly wonderful feedback on every detail of every product. So it's great to have a volunteer board of advisors that can keep you on track all the way through your growth. Okay, enough on that. Let's get into the final section, financial projections. Need to have 3 years projected on income statements, 3 years on cash flow, and you need to know the capital required. You don't have to say what the sources are, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that anyway as we go through this part of the presentation. I'm going to start with a simple income statement. Yeah, this pointer works. This is a real simple one. It's XYZ Corporation. The sales, you start it in May, the month you graduate or get your MBA or whatever, and your first month you have 2,000, then you grow the business by 2,000 more every month, so that by December you're up to $16,000, which means you had 72,000 total revenue for the year. And then if you just keep mathematically growing it, you get to about 300,000 in 2016 and 500,000 in 2017. So now that would pass as 3 years. And then for your expenses, this one has cost of goods sold as being half of the revenue, which is a sort of common situation, so that all the raw materials you're putting into your product, whatever it is, you're spending half as much on that as you're getting paid by the customer. And then the fixed costs are things like rent that just happen every month. They're pretty flat. Depreciation is the depreciation on the capital equipment you bought up front. Salaries and wages are pretty self-explanatory. This is $48,000 a year. Might be one person the first year. So that's an income statement. And income statements have to be produced according to generally accepted accounting principles, which means that you sold $2,000 worth in May, and if this is a B2B business, you may send them an invoice on June 1st, and you may get paid in July if you're lucky. That's called accounts receivable. So this is not necessarily cash. This is generally accepted accounting principles, which follows the accounting rules of when you make the sale, you show the revenue. When you buy the goods, you may not have paid for them yet, but you bought $1,000 worth of goods there, and you may not pay for them until the next month or 2 months later, depending on the terms you have with your supplier. So these two lines don't necessarily reflect cash very well. And depreciation is depreciation on a bunch of stuff you bought up front, capital. You could have bought furniture, computers, copier, I don't know, whatever you need to get your office going up front. And so that's the reason we ask not only for the income statement, but for a cash flow statement, which is, voila, here. And the differences are on the 3 lines that are in yellow. We assume that the revenue of 2,000 in May you didn't actually collect until 60 days later. It's a 60-day average lag time. Some may take longer, some may take less, but it's going to average 60 days. So you collect May's sales in July, June sales in August, etc. And then on cost of goods, you're going to pay the next month after you bought the cost of goods. So your cash statement shows this. And depreciation is money that you spent up front on what's called an investing activity. Just a word about cash flow statements. There are rules about what cash flow statements have to show. Again, it's Accounting Standards Board. And operating activities has to be one section, which is all derived from your income statement, as you can see here. Investing activities have to be a second section, and financing activities have to be a third section. And then when you add up all the stuff in a column, you get the net cash flow for the month. And actually this is showing net cash flow cumulatively, so it's 14,000 negative the first month, and then 6,000 more the second month, so it's 20,000 that you're down after 2 months. And then you keep getting a little deeper here. So now you can see the difference between a cash flow statement and the income statement. And the reason I do this is because you're going to have to come up with the amount of capital you need to start your business. And the gentleman last week showed an income statement and looked at it and said, well, look, if you look at all these months, this adds up, to $6,000 negative, or what, let's raise $10,000 or something, so we can cover ourselves. And it's not quite that simple. You really need to, just looking at this, if this is not cumulative down here, you're negative 4,250 in 1 month, and it gets worse. By the end of September, you're negative 11,250 if you add all these up. So you better raise at least 11,250. But then that raises the question, if you know your projection shows X dollars are going to be needed based on the cash flow, do you raise X, or do you raise less than X, more than X? And if so, what amount do you raise? And there's no right answer, but part of it has to do with volatility. How likely is it that it's going to fluctuate up or down more than you think it will? And usually it fluctuates on the downside. My first company, the one I started way back when, we figured we'd need $250,000 before we broke even. It was a software business, and that's in today's dollars. And so I remembered what I'd learned from a professor of mine in my MBA program at Stanford, and he said, if you don't know a reason to use a different formula, use 2x. Raise twice as much money as you need. That way you've got a buffer that's a 100% buffer. So you can be off as much as 100%, and still you'll have enough to get through. So I raised $500,000. And again, that's in today's dollars. It was actually less than that back then. And we projected we're going to break even in a certain month. And we actually did break even in that month, month 10. But we ended up going through $450,000 of the $500,000. So we made it, just barely though. But it's a formula that worked for me, and it may not work for everybody, but it was one that my professor had recommended. So if you look at this cash flow, this is cumulative across the bottom here. 35,000 at the end of the first year is as bad as it gets, and then the next year you make 30,000 profit, so then you're only down 5,000. So you got to get through a negative $35,000 eye of the needle to survive if this is right. And if you do better, you won't need it all. And if you do worse, you're going to wish you had more than 35,000 that you had raised.
So if we say that we're raising 55 or whatever, we don't put it there in the financing.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. We're going to put it in financing. That's the last step here, and that's going to be the last slide on this section. Because obviously we don't have any. This is impossible. You got to raise money to meet this. And you got to put it in at least 35,000 just to get these numbers to turn from negative numbers to positive numbers. So again, as an example, the last slide shows you in yellow what we changed from the previous slide, which is we put in won $35,000 for first place in the GW Business Plan competition. Judges will like that self-confidence you have there. Put in $5,000 from ourselves. And by the way, it's good if it's important if you're ever going to raise money from outside investors to show that you put in your own skin in the game. You got to get something in there. With my first business, I had just finished paying for my own MBA, and I literally had only $2,000 left. And so I offered to put my $2,000 in to this $500,000 raise, and it worked. I mean, at first I wasn't doing that, but one of my investors said, Rollins, you better do that. Commit yourself. Be all in. And so I did, even though it was not much money. So put in something, 5,000 here, and then the outside investors, I got 20,000. That makes 60,000 of the 70,000, and then I got the bank loaning them 10,000 on a bank line of credit secured by their receivables, which is a great way to finance businesses going forward. Once you're up and running and you have receivables, and they have on the top line here receivables going forward. Like in November, they're running 10,000 a month, and so since they takes 2 months to collect, they've got sitting in receivables right now about $20,000. So that $20,000 in receivables would certainly convince the bank that they should loan them 10, because they got 2-to-1 collateral, and that's without putting the personal assets of the founders at risk. Even though the bank will also require that the founders, or at least one or more of the founders, co-sign on the loan. It's normal when you're starting a business. You got to co-sign a lot of paper, but at least you've got the receivables to protect you, because they're real money there. That if for some reason you couldn't pay the bank would take it out of the receivables to get repaid later on. So this is a way to accomplish that $70,000 thing without creating much dilution. If the founders bought their stock first before winning the business plan competition, and then had it diluted by the investors putting in $20,000, I figured the investors would own about 1/3 of the company for their $20,000, and the founders would own maybe 2/3 of it with their $5,000. So the leverage works the right way there for the founders, and you can play with that as you go forward with these financials and figure out how you're going to do it with your business. But this is one scenario that seems to work and gives them the comfort of raising twice as much as they think they need.
When you're trying to raise like this 2x, especially when you've heard several times from different people, how do you explain that to an investor? You say, for example, I think I need to raise $250,000 to get my break even on month 10, and then in addition to telling them that, say I also want an extra $250,000 as a cushion, or do you say I need to raise $500,000 so I'm not going to break even until month 20?
You show them best case, which is the one you have in your business plan. You show them a worst case scenario where it does take all $500,000 because things develop more slowly on the revenue side. I'm sorry, I called it best case. It's the most likely case is the one you have in here, most likely case. Your worst case is the one that uses the whole $500,000, and then the best case might only use, of the 250, you might only use half of that. Might use 125,000. So you could show them 3 scenarios. You don't have to do that in this business plan as a semi-finalist, but when you get to actually raising money from investors, you could show them 3 scenarios, and that would help answer the question about why are you raising twice as much as it looks like you need in the best case. Yeah.
Do you want both of these charts in the 10 pages? Or
Oh,
I thought from last week's discussion we were just going to
you could do a little tiny box in the paper, but you may want to do a page of the appendix. Of the 5 pages you get in the appendix, you may have 1 or 2 of those that get into some of this. It's really your choice. You just need to have the required minimum stuff in there, which is what we had on the first slide. This slide has a balance sheet, which is the only financial report that we haven't talked about so far, and this is not required by the business plan competition. Shows assets on one side of your balance sheet and liabilities and owner's equity on the other side of the balance sheet, and the total of the assets equals the total of the liabilities plus the owner's equity. Always, that's why it's called a balance sheet. The 2 sides balance. total amounts required. This is optional. Probably don't know yet how much you're putting in or whatever. You know these are due by March 3rd, before midnight, 11:59 p.m. And then just some reminders about things about the type size and face and 1-inch margins, and you'll be notified exactly 2 weeks later. The judges are going to turn these around quickly, we hope. And if you'd like copies of my slides, this is my email address. I'll send you a copy of the slides. But I really sincerely wish you all the best of luck, and congratulations on making the semifinals in a competition which is actually now one of the 10 largest in the United States among all the universities, with over $200,000 in prize money. So good luck to you. Thank you.